Bill Clinton was so anti-working class and, as it happens, anti-black, that this was literally part of his campaign strategy. Look at him. Look how fucking cool he is. He's not like those other moms. He's a cool mom. Attending black churches was theater. This whole saxophone thing was theater. And frankly, I'm of the opinion that the whole Monica Lewinsky thing and the impeachment thing was theater too, to distract you from what he was doing. Maybe that's a reach. I don't think it is. You know how much I hate Ronald Reagan, and I blame him for the downfall of our society. But Bill Clinton was Ronald Reagan 2.0. He expanded on the shit that Ronald Reagan did that resulted in us no longer having a Democratic Party at all, or I should say no longer having a left party at all. And because of Bill Clinton and his bullshit centrist ideals, we now have two right wings. The Democrats are right, and the Republicans are fascist right. And like I said in my preview video, it's always going to be fuck the Clintons, plural. Nobody ever talks about this, but Bill Clinton was a founding member of something called the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Council, pro-business, pro-Wall Street, and anti-labor. I don't know how any of those things could even be a faction of the Democratic Party. I don't know how they didn't see that it was just the right wing infiltrating the Democratic Party. But here we are. The Democratic Party has historically been pro-labor, pro-civil rights, and anti-war. And the DLC and Bill Clinton were opposite. These were like the only things that differentiated the Democrats from the Republicans. And here they are pretending to be Democrats on an entirely Republican value system masquerading as Democrats. He didn't move center, he moved right. And then every Democrat ever since has just followed suit. Remember how I said he was all about personal responsibility? He was behind a fucking act called the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. This whole thing reinforced Reagan-era shit of how poverty is a personal failure and it's not our responsibility. He further cut welfare. And he, by the way, made one of the requirements of welfare working, which made it possible that employers could pay you poverty wages, like Walmart, for example, the largest example, and then the government would subsidize those in poverty because of corporate greed. Instead of saying that corporations had to pay living wages, they said, go ahead, work for poverty wages, slave wages, and then maybe we'll throw you a couple bucks for food. On top of work requirements for welfare, he also capped funding and instituted time limits for how long you can be on welfare. States were able to use this to kick people off of the welfare rolls completely. And we went from 68% of poor families being subsidized, being helped with welfare, down to 27% by 2012. But did your taxes go down? No, the fuck they didn't. They just rerouted everything to defense contractors. But I'll get to that in a second. So right before this personal responsibility bullshit act came the crime bill, the one that Joe Biden co-wrote. You've probably heard of the 3 strikes rule where they were sending people to prison for life for drug offenses, for nonviolent crimes. And there were harsher penalties for crack possession versus cocaine possession. And who do you think was more likely to have crack? And they knew it, and it was by design. The bill earmarked $10 billion for new prison construction because they knew they were about to fill up the labor camps and they need to add more labor camps. They funded 100,000 more cops. And there was also the mandatory minimums. There was no longer the idea that each person is an individual and every circumstance is different. Min-man, nothing we can do, nothing the judge can do. For drugs, there are people still sitting in prison today for having been arrested in the 90s 3 times for drug possession. I'm not talking about dealing, I'm talking about possession. Who do you think this disproportionately affected? The guy who let people call him the first black president brought back slavery in the form of the prison industrial complex. And the way that they encouraged the states to start locking up more people was to tie in how many people they lock up to how much federal fucking funding they could get. This crime bill passed in 1994, and by 2000, 1 in 3 Black men in their 20s were incarcerated. And that's not because they were committing more crimes, believe me. And as if by architectural design, one thing leading to the other, in 1999, Clinton repealed Glass-Steagall. And this was an example of his deregulation that fucked us. And the law that it repealed, that it deregulated, was the law that said that regular consumer savings banks and investment banks were to remain separate. This allowed for them to merge and created the too big to fail banks. Now, your regular bank that you put your money into for savings was allowed to be gambling with your money, when before this they could not. This made regular banks high-risk investment banks, basically. And if they went down and everyone's money is in there, the government's gotta bail them out, or else we're all done for, which led into and allowed the 2008 crash. Banks were giving subprime loans to people who qualified for prime loans. And guess who those were disproportionately targeting? Black and brown people. And the 2008 crash resulted in Black families losing 50% of their wealth. Almost by design. Who do you think that helped? Who do you think deregulating this helped? Wall Street, and Wall Street only. And who did it hurt? Which brings me to the military-industrial complex and forever wars, brought to you by Bill Clinton. He convinced you that poverty was a personal problem, and everyone was cheering for that. Yeah, fuck the poor. But like I said, you were still paying just as much in taxes, if not more, and it was all going to defense contractors. Clinton's Pentagon actively pushed for defense contractors to merge. Hey guys, we don't need so many people making weapons and planes and things like that. So why don't you guys just get together? Why the fuck would he do that? Why the fuck would he do that? Now all we have is 5 big military defense contractors, and they get to lobby both sides. And now we're in forever wars because they continue to fund the Pentagon more than anything else in this country. All of that money that was going to social good is now going to the Pentagon, to defense contractors. And as long as they're in the business of making weapons, they need us to be at war. Your taxes didn't go down. They're just benefiting somebody else. And because it was packaged in a guy who played the saxophone, everyone had to shrug their shoulders and go with it. No one could say that what he was doing was anti-Black, anti-working class. Look, he came from a poor family, he had a single mom, he goes to Black churches. It was all fucking performance. He somehow stayed a sweetheart. I don't know how, but he's like on record now saying, yeah, maybe the crime bill went too far. Like, aw shucks, I didn't realize it was gonna go so far. These guys keep playing with people's lives and they get to pretend to have been dumb. I didn't know what the fallout was gonna be of allocating $10 billion extra dollars to build more prisons. I didn't know what was gonna happen when I instituted mandatory minimums and life sentences for drug possession. I had no idea, guys. I was just trying to clean up the streets. Never mind the fact that he could have allocated that money to social programs that could have helped those people off the streets if that's what he was really concerned about. All bullshit. And so this might be the bridge too far here, but I feel like the Lewinsky thing was also just a distraction. Because if the saxophone didn't distract you and the going to Black churches didn't distract you and him constantly trying to act like the cool guy didn't distract you, they distracted you with the smoke and mirrors of the ultimate political theater of an impeachment. Bill Clinton pretended to be a Democrat while actually being a Republican, the DLC. And he just picked up where Reagan left off. And then every Democrat that has run ever since has been right of him. So now we have a bird with 2 right wings flying into a fucking wall. Thanks, Bill.